Welcome to the Real Money Pathway, where I share my journey from financial collapse to lasting wealth. I'm David Kim, and I'll guide you through practical strategies that transform my finances and can transform yours too. Let's build your pathway to financial freedom.
The content of this podcast is provided for general information purposes only and do not constitute financial advice. Listeners should not act upon the content or information here without first seeking appropriate advice from a financial professional.
Welcome back to the Real Money Pathway. I'm David Kim, author of The Real Money Guide, the missing manual for financial recovery. Over our first 5 episodes, we've explored my journey from financial collapse to rebuilding, the psychological impact of financial trauma, creating a structured recovery roadmap, establishing emergency funds, and managing cash flow during crisis. Today, we're tackling another critical aspect of financial recovery: strategic debt management. And I want to be completely upfront with you from the start. This isn't about quick fixes or debt hacks. I faced over $200,000 in credit card debt before my bankruptcy, along with personal loans, auto financing, and mortgage obligations that created a monthly payment burden exceeding $7,000. The weight of that debt wasn't just financial, it was a constant psychological pressure that affected every aspect of my life. What I learned through that experience and through my careful rebuilding process is that effective debt management requires more than just making minimum payments or following generic advice. It demands a strategic approach that aligns with your specific situation, your priorities, and your long-term financial goals. Whether you're facing overwhelming debt like I was, managing the aftermath of financial hardship, or simply working to optimize your existing obligations, today's episode will provide practical strategies for making debt work for your recovery rather than against it. One of the most important realizations during my financial recovery was not all debt is created equal. Before my bankruptcy, I treated debt as a single category. It was all just money I owed. This oversimplification led to poor prioritization decisions that ultimately made my situation worse. During my rebuilding phase, I developed what I called a debt hierarchy, a strategic framework for understanding how different types of debt affect your financial health, your security, and your recovery prospects. This isn't about which debts are good or bad. In the abstract, it's about understanding their specific impact on your situation. At the top of the hierarchy are secured debts. They're tied to essential assets, particularly your home and your primary vehicles. During financial challenges, maintaining these payments typically take priority because the consequences of defaulting extend well beyond financial penalties to potentially losing your home and your transportation that's necessary for creating income. I learned this lesson pretty painfully when prioritizing credit card payments over my car loan during my early consulting work. When my vehicle was at risk of repossession, I suddenly faced not just a transportation problem, but an income threat, since I needed reliable transportation to meet clients. The potential financial damage far exceeded the immediate payment amount. Just below secured essentials are tax obligations and legally mandated payments like child support. These debts carry unique consequences beyond financial penalties, including potentially legal action that can significantly complicate your recovery efforts. When I fell behind on quarterly tax payments during an unstable consulting period, the penalties and interest just created this cascading effect and problem that took me months to resolve. Student loans represent another special category due to their persistence through bankruptcy and limited forgiveness options. My own student loans survived bankruptcy, creating obligations that required careful integration into my recovery planning. Next comes unsecured debt, like credit cards, personal loans, and medical bills. These typically carry higher interest rates, but fewer immediate consequences for missed payments beyond credit damage and collection activities. This debt doesn't make them unimportant, but it does affect their position in a strategic repayment hierarchy during the times that you have financial constraints. And finally, informal debts to family and friends occupy a unique position. While they may carry minimal financial consequences for non-payment, they involve relationship implications that deserve careful consideration. During my recovery, I maintained complete transparency with family members who had lent me money, creating realistic repayment schedules even when the amounts were small. Beyond this general hierarchy, three different factors significantly affect how specific debts should be prioritized in your situation. First, interest rates dramatically impact the long term cost of debt. My credit card obligations range from 19.99% to a painful 29.99% after default, creating substantial cost trajectories for similar principal amounts. Second, term length affects both monthly payment burden and total interest paid. My 60-month car loan created lower payments than a 36-month option, but significantly increased the total cost, including interest, over time. Third, credit reporting practices vary substantially between creditors. Some report late payments after 30 days, while others wait 60 days. Understanding these differences help protect your credit score when perfect payment isn't possible. The most important insight from my rebuilding experience was learning to view debt strategically rather than emotionally. Each obligation represents a financial tool with specific terms, consequences, and impacts on your broader financial picture. By understanding these distinctions, you can make intentional decisions about which debts to prioritize when resources are limited. I created a simple but effective debt inventory spreadsheet that helped me visualize these differences. For each debt obligation, I documented the outstanding balance, interest rate, monthly payment, the secured status, if there was collateral, what the late payment policy and grace periods were, credit reporting practices, and the consequences of default beyond credit impact. This comprehensive view the spreadsheet gave me transformed how I approached my remaining debt after bankruptcy. It allowed me to develop a strategic repayment plan based on mathematical reality rather than just emotional pressure or creditor demands. This brings us to the debt avalanche versus the snowball methods. When rebuilding after financial setbacks, your approach to debt repayment can significantly impact both your financial progress and your psychological momentum. Two methods have gained particular prominence in financial recovery: the debt avalanche and the debt snowball. The debt avalanche method prioritizes obligations based on interest rate, directing extra payments towards the highest rate debt first while maintaining minimum payments on everything else. Once the highest rate debt is eliminated, then you redirect that payment amount to the next highest rate obligation, and so forth, creating an accelerated repayment cascade from highest to lowest rate debt. Mathematically, this approach minimizes interest costs and typically results in the fastest debt elimination when followed consistently. For someone with really strong financial discipline and emotional resilience, the avalanche method often represents the optimal financial strategy. Now, the debt snowball method, popularized by Dave Ramsey, takes a different approach by prioritizing debts based on balance size, regardless of interest rates. You direct extra payments towards your smallest balance first, creating quick wins that build psychological momentum. As each small debt disappears, you redirect that payment towards the next largest obligation from the bottom, creating a snowball of increased payment power. While this approach typically costs more in interest, its psychological benefits can prove valuable for people rebuilding over financial trauma. The quick wins create confidence and motivation that may prove more valuable than mathematical optimization, particularly when emotional factors threaten your consistency. During my financial recovery, I discovered that this wasn't an either-or decision. It was about finding the right approach for my specific circumstances and my psychological needs. I used a hybrid momentum method that balanced mathematical efficiency with psychological reinforcement. So here's how I implemented this approach during my rebuilding phase. First, I created a comprehensive debt inventory with all relevant details for every debt obligation. Second, I calculated my debt momentum threshold, the dollar amount that would create meaningful psychological benefit when eliminated. For me, this was approximately $1,000 during early recovery. Third, I separated my debts into two categories: small, momentum building obligations below this threshold and then larger obligations above it. For the small debt category, I followed a modified snowball approach, eliminating the smallest balances first to create those psychological wins. Within 3 months, I had completely eliminated two small credit card balances of $450 and $720, creating this tangible evidence that progress was possible despite my limited resources. For larger obligations, I switched to the avalanche method, prioritizing based on interest rates to then minimize costs over time. This dual approach balanced immediate psychological benefits with long term financial optimization. The key insight that made this strategy successful for me wasn't the specific method, but the deliberate decision making process that I put behind it. By understanding both the mathematical and psychological factors at play, I could make intentional choices that supported both financial progress and emotional resilience. For those implementing either approach, I found several practical elements crucial for success. First, automate those minimum payments on all obligations to ensure baseline compliance, regardless of other priorities. This prevents unintentional defaults while focusing extra resources strategically. Second, create some sort of visual tracking system that provides regular reinforcement. My debt paydown chart on the refrigerator created daily visibility into progress that helped me stay motivated and continue the effort. Third, celebrate meaningful milestones appropriately. When I eliminated my first post bankruptcy credit card, Lacey and I marked the occasion with a modest celebration dinner, acknowledging progress without creating new financial strain. And fourth, adjust methods as circumstances change. As my financial situation stabilized and psychological momentum built, I shifted more towards the mathematically optimal avalanche approach. The decision between avalanche, snowball, or even my hybrid approaches isn't about which method is universally the best, but about which aligns most effectively with your own specific situation. Think about these, consider these, and choose your approach. If you're recovering from financial trauma and need psychological wins to build confidence, the snowball method's quick victories may prove valuable despite higher overall cost. If you have strong financial discipline and emotional resilience, the avalanche method's mathematical efficiency will serve you the best. And then, if you face a mix of small and large obligations with varying interest rates, my hybrid approach may provide the optimal balance between psychological and financial benefits. Consistency ultimately matters more than the specific method chosen. The perfect approach implemented inconsistently will produce much worse results than a good approach followed with discipline. When facing significant debt challenges, direct negotiation with creditors can create opportunities that substantially improve your financial position. During both my pre bankruptcy struggles and post bankruptcy rebuilding, I discovered that creditors are often more flexible than their initial communications suggest, particularly when presented with realistic alternatives. The most important insight from my experience is that creditors prefer some payment over no payment. When bankruptcy or complete default becomes a realistic possibility, many creditors will consider compromises that seemed impossible during early conversations. This doesn't mean threatening bankruptcy as a negotiation tactic, but rather being honest about your financial reality when it includes limited repayment capacity. Before attempting any negotiation, thorough preparation dramatically increases your chance of success. Here's a process that helped me approach these challenging conversations with confidence and clarity. First, document your complete financial situation, including income, essential expenses, and other debt obligations. This creates credibility while establishing the realistic parameters for any potential agreement. Second, determine your specific request and fallback positions before making contact. Having a clear ask with supporting rationale makes the conversation much more productive than just general pleas for help. Third, understand the specific creditor's policies and typical accommodation options. Different institutions have widely varying hardship programs, settlement authorities, and negotiation practices. And fourth, prepare specific documentation that supports your situation and request. Pay stubs, expense records, and other verification materials often make the difference between rejection and approval. With this preparation completed, I approached negotiations with different types of creditors using strategies tailored to their specific characteristics. For credit card companies, I focused on hardship programs that temporarily reduced interest rates and payments during financial challenges. During my pre bankruptcy time, I successfully negotiated a 6-month hardship program that reduced my interest rate from 24.99% down to 9.99% while I established a more stable income. The key was providing specific income documentation and concrete timelines for returning to regular payments. For tax obligations, I focused on formal installment agreements that prevented penalties while creating manageable payment structures. After falling behind on those quarterly estimated taxes during my consulting work, I established an IRS payment plan that avoided liens while accommodating my variable income reality. For student loan servicers, I focused on income driven repayment options that created sustainable payments aligned with my financial capacity. This approach prevented default while creating breathing room for overall financial stabilization. The specific negotiation approach that proved most effective varied by creditor type, but several principles consistently improve these outcomes. First, maintain that professional, solution oriented tone throughout all your communication. Despite the emotional weight of financial challenges, approaching negotiations with composure and respect creates better outcomes than expressing frustration or desperation. Second, document everything meticulously, including the name of the representatives that you spoke with, reference numbers, date and times of conversations, and specific agreements reached. This documentation proved invaluable when agreements required reinforcement or clarification through subsequent contacts. Third, focus on mutually beneficial outcomes rather than unilateral demands. Framing proposals in terms of how they benefit both parties creates more receptive responses than approaches focused solely on your own needs. Fourth, be persistent, but don't be aggressive. Many of my successful negotiations required multiple contacts and escalation to supervisors or even specialized departments. Polite persistence often succeeded where initial inquiries or demands failed. For those considering debt settlement as a more comprehensive approach, my experience offers important cautions. While settlement can significantly reduce those outstanding balances, it carries significant implications that deserve careful consideration. Settlement typically requires a lump sum that may be challenging to accumulate during financial recovery. When I settled a $7,200 credit card balance for $3,600 during rebuilding, gathering that amount required temporarily redirecting all available resources. Forgiven debts, while they sound good, generally create a tax liability reported on a Form 1099-C, potentially creating a tax obligation that requires several planning. A $3,600 debt forgiveness generates a tax liability of $900 to $1,000. Credit impacts from settlements typically remain for 7 years, affecting future borrowing capacity and terms. My settled account appeared as, quote, settled for less than full amount on credit reports, creating explanations during subsequent credit applications. For those considering professional debt settlement services, proceed with extreme caution. During my financial struggles, I briefly engaged a settlement company that charged substantial fees while delivering minimal results. Before engaging any service, thoroughly research their fee structure, success rates, and real customer experiences. While negotiating independently or with professional support, maintain detailed records of all agreements, especially written confirmation of settlement terms. These documents proved essential when questions arose about satisfied obligations years after completion. One of the most challenging aspects of financial recovery is balancing debt management with rebuilding essential financial components like emergency savings, retirement contributions, and even quality of life improvements. The conventional wisdom to focus exclusively on debt elimination before any other financial priorities often proves impractical and potentially counterproductive during extended recovery periods. During my rebuilding years, I created a balanced recovery approach that allowed simultaneous progress across multiple financial dimensions without compromising debt reduction progress. This approach recognizes that effective recovery requires both reducing liabilities and building assets in coordinated progression. The foundation of this approach is a 75-25 framework. I implemented this framework approximately 6 months into my recovery journey. After establishing my bare minimum emergency savings of $1,000 and stabilizing essential expenses, I started allocating 75% of all available funds beyond necessities towards debt reduction, while directing 25% towards financial rebuilding components. This wasn't an arbitrary division, but a deliberate balance. It maintained meaningful debt reduction that satisfied both mathematical requirements and psychological needs. The 75% allocation created visible monthly progress against all of those outstanding obligations. It then allowed gradual building of crucial financial components that supported my long-term stability. That 25% allocation funded emergency savings beyond minimum levels, modest contributions to retirement, and even an occasional quality of life improvement. Finally, it created sustainable motivation through balanced progress rather than extreme sacrifice. The incremental improvements across multiple domains prevented that burnout often associated with that all or nothing approach. The specific implementation of this framework evolved through recovery based on changing circumstances. As income stabilized and basic emergency funds were established, this allocation gradually included retirement contributions, professional development investments, and modest quality of life improvements. Within the 75% debt reduction allocation, I maintained a hybrid avalanche and snowball approach that I discussed earlier, creating both mathematical efficiency and psychological momentum. This combination of strategic allocation between debt reduction and financial building, alongside optimized prioritization within that debt category, created an accelerated progress over time. For those implementing this balanced approach, follow these practical guidelines that I learned from my experience. They're valuable and will help you throughout this journey. First, ensure the debt portion of your allocation remains sufficient to create meaningful progress. If your available funds beyond necessities are severely limited, you may need to temporarily adjust it to like an 85-15 or even a 90-10 split until more resources become available. Second, create separate accounts for different financial purposes to prevent allocation blurring. I maintain distinct accounts for emergency savings, debt payoff acceleration, and other financial goals. That prevented the diversion of funds intended for those specific purposes. Third, review and adjust allocations quarterly based on changing circumstances. As my consulting income increased and stabilized, I gradually shifted from that 75-25 to a 70-30 split that accelerated financial building while maintaining strong debt reduction. Fourth, again, celebrate. Celebrate those balanced progress across categories appropriately. Acknowledging achievements in both debt reduction and financial building reinforces that value of the blended and balanced approach. Most importantly, recognize that sustainable recovery typically requires years rather than just months, making balance essential for long-term success. The balanced approach maintains momentum through the extended rebuilding period that most significant recoveries require. This approach, again, contradicts some of the most popular financial advice that recommends exclusive focus on debt elimination before addressing anything else. While mathematically that's optimal in abstract calculations, in reality, with such a single focus, it often fails to take into account the psychological fatigue and unexpected emergencies and opportunity cost of delayed retirement savings. My balanced approach isn't about compromising debt reduction, but it's about creating sustainable progress across the complete financial picture. By maintaining appropriate proportions between debt elimination and financial rebuilding, you create both immediate progress as well as long-term security. Beyond general debt management approaches, certain types of obligations require specialized strategies due to their unique characteristics and implications. During my financial recovery, I navigated several of these special cases, developing targeted approaches for their particular challenges. Student loans, first, represents one of the most common special cases, with their persistence through bankruptcy and limited forgiveness options. They create distinct management requirements. After my bankruptcy, approximately $38,000 in student loans remained, requiring integration into my overall recovery strategy. My approach to these obligations centered on income-driven repayment plans that created manageable payments aligned with my financial reality. Rather than struggling with standard payments during early recovery, I enrolled in an income-based repayment plan that initially reduced my obligations to approximately $175 monthly, an amount that accommodated my limited consulting income while preventing default. As my income increased during later recovery stages, I implemented what I called the Standard Plus strategy. This involved returning to standard repayment, but adding 15% to each payment, creating an accelerated principal reduction without impacting other financial priorities. This approach balanced a faster payoff while maintaining the balanced recovery framework discussed earlier. For those managing student loans during recovery, there are several specialized strategies that deserve some consideration. Public service loan forgiveness offers complete forgiveness after 120 qualifying payments for those employed by the government or nonprofit organizations. Income-driven plans create sustainable payments during financial recovery but increase total costs through extended terms. The right choice depends on your specific circumstances and long-term financial trajectory. Strategic prepayment focused on high-interest loans within your student debt portfolio creates maximum impact while maintaining flexibility. By targeting individual loans rather than making general additional payments, you optimize interest savings. Medical debt also creates additional special considerations due to its unique billing practices and collection characteristics. Unlike many other creditors, medical providers often show substantial flexibility in both payment arrangements and settlement offers. For those managing medical debt during recovery, several strategies can prove particularly effective. You can request itemized billing for all services. As research shows, approximately 80% of medical bills contain errors. You can negotiate directly with the provider's billing department rather than going through collection agencies whenever possible. In-house arrangements typically offer better terms with fewer credit implications. Investigate hospital financial assistance programs, which often provide substantial reductions based on your income levels. Familial debt represents the final special category with unique emotional and relationship implications alongside financial considerations. During my financial challenges, I borrowed approximately $12,000 from family members. It created obligations that extended well beyond monetary considerations. My approach to these debts involved complete transparency, formal documentation, and consistent communication throughout that repayment process. Document all terms clearly so there's no misunderstanding and it preserves relationships. Simple one-page loan agreement that includes the amount, interest, payment schedule, and contingency provisions for financial setbacks. Communicate proactively about both progress and challenges, maintaining transparency throughout the payment period. My monthly update emails to those in the family that I owed created confidence even when payments occasionally required adjustment. Prioritize appropriately within your overall debt structure, recognizing both financial and relationship implications. While mathematical optimization might suggest postponing zero interest family loans, relationship considerations often justify different prioritization. And of course, express genuine appreciation beyond repayment, acknowledging that support provided during that time of difficulty. Beyond interest payments, I found meaningful ways to demonstrate gratitude for the assistance that proved crucial during my most challenging period. Today's episode focused on strategic debt management during financial recovery, and our practical takeaway provides a starting point for developing your own debt management strategy. I'm introducing the debt comparison calculator, now available on both realmoneypathway.com and the realmoneyguide.com. This interactive tool helps evaluate different debt repayment approaches based on your specific situation and priorities. The calculator begins with a simple debt inventory where you list each obligation with its current balance, interest rate, minimum payment, and other details. This creates a comprehensive view of your complete debt picture without judgment or complexity. Using this foundation, the tool then compares different repayment strategies, avalanche, snowball, and hybrid, showing the total time and interest costs associated with each method. Rather than prescribing a universal best approach, it helps you make an informed decision based on both financial and psychological factors. The comparison section visually displays the progress trajectory for each method, helping you understand not just the end result, but the journey through repayment. This visual representation often reveals important psychological factors that pure numerical comparisons might often miss. As you begin using this tool this week, I recommend focusing on 2 specific actions. First, complete that comprehensive debt inventory without judgment or filtering. Document all your obligations regardless of size. Second, experiment with different repayment methods and allocation approaches, noting that both mathematical results and your emotional responses to each scenario. The strategy that creates both reasonable numbers and positive psychological reaction typically proves that most sustainable for long-term implementation. Effective debt management isn't about finding the universally perfect approach, but creating a personalized strategy aligned with both your financial reality and psychological needs. The right method is the one you'll implement consistently through the duration of your recovery journey. Today, we've explored strategic approaches to debt management during financial recovery. From understanding different debt types and their impacts to comparing repayment methods, negotiating with creditors, balancing debt reduction with financial rebuilding, as well as addressing special debt situations. There's one message I hope you take from this episode. It's that effective debt management requires strategic intention rather than just merely making payments. By understanding the complete picture of your obligations and implementing a structured approach aligned with your specific situation, you transform debt from an overwhelming burden to something that's manageable as part of your financial recovery. In our next episode, Banking After Bankruptcy, we'll tackle another critical aspect of financial rebuilding. I'll share that painful experience of having my ATM card declined for a $27 purchase because my account had been closed without notice, along with practical strategies for reestablishing banking relationships after severe financial setbacks. We'll explore the banking reality after financial collapse, strategies for finding institutions willing to work with you during recovery, building a functional account structure that supports rebuilding, reestablishing banking reputation through consistent practices, and progressing toward comprehensive banking services as your situation improves. As you move through the coming week, I encourage you to complete your debt inventory using this comparison calculator that we've discussed today. This comprehensive view of your obligations creates the foundation for strategic management decisions that support your overall recovery journey. I'd love to hear about your experiences implementing different repayment approaches. If you're comfortable sharing, please visit realmoneypathway.com and let me know what strategies have proven most effective in your situation. Your insights might help others facing similar challenges while shaping future episodes addressing specific debt management questions. Thank you again for joining me as we continue building practical approaches to financial recovery. Strategic debt management isn't about perfection, but about consistent progress towards financial freedom. So until next time, I'm David Kim. Remember, it's not just about money, it's about building your real money pathway to freedom. Thanks for joining me on the Real Money Pathway podcast. I'm David Kim, reminding you that financial success isn't about perfection, it's about progress. So subscribe now for more strategies, and remember, your journey to lasting wealth starts with the very next decision you make.